Look no further. This is the Power Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it's a huge week here on Alki Beach in West Seattle. SubPop Records is holding its 30th anniversary event on the beach on August 10th and 11th, and it is going to be absolute chaos as they are planning for 60,000 people in a place where they normally don't have more than 10. I won't be able to attend this one as I'll be on the mic in downtown Seattle for the annual Fred Hutch Obliteride event. If you won't be riding for The Cure next weekend, you should check out this free show. Mudhoney and a ton of other bands will be melting the faces of Seattleites. And in honor of this great event that I won't attend, my guest this week is Bob Whittaker. Bob's been in the news lately for his award-winning documentary, Return to Mount Kennedy, and he comes from a family of climbing royalty. But I'm not really into climbing, and Bob's on the show because he's a Seattle music legend. From being employee number 3 at SubPop to managing Mudhoney when they were helping create Seattle's scene to graduating to REM and working with the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, Bob has some amazing Seattle and music history to share. Before we get into the show, I want to ask you to please follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement, share my posts on Facebook, and email me if you have something to say or share. My email is mike@thepowellmovement.com, and it's always great to hear from you. Finally, I want to thank my sponsors who make this show happen. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Bob Whittaker. All right, so we are in West Seattle. It's like 90 degrees out. Seafair weekend. We'll probably hear some planes going overhead. I am sitting with Bobby Whittaker, who's made it over here. And you've been traveling a shitload the past few weeks, huh?
Yeah, I am, and I have a combination of things traveling for the film. I'll be at Aspen Film Festival.
The film, let's tell them what the film is.
I'm sorry, I'm associated with this film called Return to Mount Kennedy that Eric Becker directed, and I don't really know how to summarize it other than
It's like your dad and Bobby Kennedy climbed a mountain a long time ago, and then you recreated it 50 years later, but you're recreating that with Bobby Kennedy's kid, right?
Yeah.
So it's just like, hey, we're doing this in remembrance of that great time of a different era.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, I grew up looking at all these old National Geographics and pictures in the hallway. And I think that the concept of the film, my little brother had climbed Everest twice. My little brother, Leif Whittaker, he's a bomber, high alpine climber.
Were you like a cool alternative guy? Yeah. Would he be more climbing nerdish guy?
Yeah. I think that's a really good probably good description. He had just climbed Everest twice, and he and I were talking, and I was like, come on, man, what are you going to do for an encore? Climb it a third time? Like, give me a break. You're going to go up there past Green Boots, and get in a lineup, and just kind of giving him a hard time, And me and my big ideas, I was like, well, what we should do is go back to Mount Kennedy. It's like the 50-year anniversary coming up. What the hell happened there? Our dad met Bobby Kennedy and basically, got semi-politicized, and Bobby became an environmentalist, and let's go drill down into that. Little did I know that we would really do it.
The movie's done really well at a lot of film festivals. I think you find yourself second to Mr. Rogers at a lot of places.
Yeah. They had a bigger budget than us. That's a great story.
Yeah, even a better story. Yours definitely ties into American pop culture and the history of our country, and then the history of music. But that's Mr. Rogers, and he trumps, I think, almost anything.
Yeah, and I don't begrudge him for that. That's an incredible film. This is new territory for me. I'm an old school Seattleite, old school rocker, grunge guy, music background, music fan. Worked in the music business for, 30 odd years. Tours, records, record labels, record cycles, marketing, all that stuff was what I did for years. And basically a parallel effort of mine is sort of conservation and recreation and the outdoors. But that's all just a hobby.
Did that come later on in life? Because it seemed like you lived pretty hard your whole life until maybe you get to 40. We're going to talk about conservation and stuff later, but I minimize that because that's not really important to me. Yep. I mean, it's important, but I don't talk about it much. Sure. But it seems like that's something that might have happened later in life.
I mean, it happened early. My father ran REI for 25 years, and so I was constantly outdoors or on public land or, recreating. And then I sort of split from that. I left the family, moved out before I graduated from high school, and struck out on my own, basically. Going on tour with the band Mudhoney, or working at SubPop Records downtown right when they first started. I quit that to go on tour with Mudhoney. And after that so basically I think I split from my athletic outdoor world right after that first Mudhoney tour. I can remember I came home and sold my Elan skis with Gates A bindings to pay my rent. And I didn't look back for 30 years.
Okay, I'll reel it back in. And you're born and raised in Seattle?
I was born in Seattle, Swedish hospital, to Blanche and Jim Whittaker. 1966, August 8th. My birthday's coming up here. And raised in Seattle, up on Lake Sammamish, then Capitol Hill. And then my folks were divorced.
You were born into climbing royalty. When you were born, your dad's already known as one of the elite climbers in the world.
Yeah. I don't have a lot of memories of the family being together back then, but yes.
When they divorced?
I think, I don't know, I was like 5 or something like that. But I do remember him and his buddies trying to put ice down his back in a cabin in San Juan's, and they were all fighting each other in the living room. They all landed on me and either broke or sprained my arm. Some pretty big dudes.
Okay. So your dad's a badass. He's the first American to climb Everest, and that's a huge deal. Yeah. They eventually have you. They name you after Bobby Kennedy based on the climb we talked about. I guess your dad probably has a man crush on Bobby Kennedy. He has a man crush on your dad. You end up being little Bobby. And you're also like a little bit of a punk rock kid, I feel like, too. Probably never embracing authority by any means. Probably it's always kind of a big fuck you. And was it ever weird being named after a Kennedy?
Yeah, I guess it was hard. I didn't really have a place to put it. I didn't really understand it, it didn't make sense to me until I actually went out and purchased a Dead Kennedys record here in West Seattle. And my father spotted it in my collection. And he was just kind of like, why? And I'm like, ooh, that's a good question. And I explained it was, probably shock value and all these other things. I found myself trying to explain punk rock. It's funny though, so there's this braiding of punk rock and then Seattle outdoor. The Mountaineers were a pretty progressive outfit. That was a club, Pacific Northwest Climbing Club. And then REI, recreational equipment that my father ran for 25 years, was the retail effort of that. But you're talking about a fringe group, sort of, and women were equal and out climbing. To me, there was parallels between punk rock and this sort of outdoor world, this sort of outdoor adventure. Punk rock was a little bit more cultural for me, but the Northwest outdoor activity and that community is cultural too. So for me, there's sort of these parallels that kind of come together in the film, actually.
Were you pushed into climbing from a young age?
My father took me up to West Seattle. It's called Sherman Rock, I think. Camp Long. Yeah, it's a man-made climbing rock that my father actually climbed on, and I don't know how many, in the 30s or something. And he showed me how to belay up there and do some scrambling. And then I think I was about 16 or so when we climbed Mount Rainier together.
Was that something you were stoked to do or something you had to do because your dad's a badass climber?
I wasn't necessarily stoked, and I can barely remember it. I can remember throwing my breakfast up on top, which is like a toast and a Snickers bar. But I remember trying to get in shape for that climb, and I think I got in shape for that climb by skateboarding. Basically, I got off my bus from school early and would skateboard home. So I wasn't the most fit.
Skateboarding, is that before the Pal Peralta days? It's probably like the Zephyr days, 83, 84, even before that?
Yeah. I mean, I had a Santa Cruz street skate. I wasn't a bowl guy or anything like that. So for me, it was more street skating. Bowls didn't exist. Mm-hmm. People had ramps. I wasn't a ramp or a bowl guy. People were popping up ramps like the Mike Ranquit or Monk when they tried to build that bowl underneath the Admiral Bridge. Mike Ranquit had the green ramp or the wilderness ramp. So I was more of a street skater guy, but I was never that good at it. I wasn't flipping the board. I wasn't doing street tricks or anything.
More the culture, hanging out, skating.
Yeah.
Power slides as fast as you could. You could do that shit.
Yeah.
Were you into snow culture as well? I saw some pictures of you ski racing, but that was when you were just a little kid. Did you stay into skiing or did you switch over to snowboarding when everybody was doing it?
Well, so my folks got divorced when I was really young, and I went to Hawaii. So I was doing the ski stuff before I went to Hawaii. So I was in Hawaii for 5 years, and I think I came back to Seattle in 82. So coming back to Seattle, I would have been bringing back some of that skateboard culture and experience.
Did you go there with your mom?
Yep.
And then you come back. Do you ever split time with your dad?
Yeah.
Does that fuck you up at all, not having like...
yeah, it was a little confusing.
Do you have two families?
Yeah, and you're vacillating between the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii, and I love the water in Hawaii. That was pretty amazing. But the mountains leave a little bit to be desired.
And there's something to be said for being around your dad, too, because I'm sure he's got to be a hero to you, too. Probably a dick at the same time, but a hero.
So I wasn't super close with my father, but he was a great father figure, I think, is kind of how I...
For the whole country, a great father figure. He's like being Ward Cleaver.
That's how I've kind of compartmentalized it, is that he was a good father figure, I think.
Is that why you kind of strayed from everything normal in the family, it seemed like?
I think probably. So my family was pretty dispersed. My older brothers had split early and gone all kinds of sideways or, doing their own thing. My folks are divorced. I'm bouncing between Hawaii and Seattle, whatever. And then the second I was 17, 18, I could strike out on my own. I did.
Your parents cool with you leaving the house on your own at 17?
I moved out my senior year, just towards the end, because they had sold their house, and my dad had sold his house and moved to Port Townsend. So I went out and got my own apartment at that point. So my family was dispersed, and I've always liked to say I like to handpick. Handpick families can be better than blood relation. Blood relation can be a mixed bag, but if you're in control of picking your friends, that could be a healthier environment potentially, or more nurturing.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the family you come from, but yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So in my case, it's fun to be a part of something. And so for me, that was the Seattle music scene.
Do you even graduate high school?
Yeah.
And did you go to school after high school?
I went to Evergreen State College in Olympia for a year. Is that what I did, I think? Yeah, and then I dropped out and joined the circus.
In 86, 85, you're just figuring out you're going to move to your own apartment in high school. And the music scene, what is that like? Because I'm a kid on the East Coast. All we're hearing is like gangster rap, Guns N' Roses, Metallica, and Pantera. That's the only kind of stuff that you can listen to. There's a lot of bubblegum kind of metal stuff going on. I'm wearing a Nelson shirt. I think that fits that category. And what's the scene out here that we don't see? Because that's probably the coolest it ever was, is before everybody knew it.
Yeah, it was banging. It was, it was incredible. The shows were $2, $3, and you're talking Butthole Surfers and, Johnny Thunders and, all kinds of crazy stuff. A Black Flag used to come up. But then again, Seattle was isolated. Like bands would go to San Francisco and then they make a right and head towards Colorado or Denver or whatever. Not a lot of bands came through here. So you had this sort of influence of some bands, but also it was this weird Northwest outpost that was kind of like inbred in the sense of influences.
The sound here was definitely different too. It seemed like everybody was doing different stuff with their instruments, making them sound shittier, which actually made it sound better.
You can almost hear the influence when Black Flags like My War came out.
Yeah.
And that was a big influential band because they kept coming back. But Tales of Terrors came through here, Black Flag, and the Butthole Surfers showed us how to do it, All of a sudden, all of these bands that were kind of trying to knock off parts of Aerosmith or Black Sabbath or whatever were like getting weird in a good way. And some of them got poppy and things like Nirvana happened.
Did you have any musical background? You come from climbing royalty, but is there any music in your upbringing?
My brother was 10 years older than me. My closest brother, Scott. I remember sitting in his Barracuda in Seattle, him playing 8 tracks of acid rock, as my mother Blanche would call it. And so that was Aerosmith, Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, and I don't know how old I was. I was tiny at that point. And then I got my own record player, my own 8-track player, got the same records. One day someone gave me a Devo record, or Devo 8-track. And then I was like, wow, my people.
We're going to get into your music life, but I guess a couple things I want to know about growing up is, one, did you play any team sports?
Not in high school. I'd already joined the skate.
Went over to the dark side?
Yeah, it's basically. And so my team sport was music, slam dancing, and stuff like that. So before that, it was skiing. And in Hawaii, I think I showed you that photo. There's that photo of me in 1977 on the basketball team in Hawaii. So that was 1977. I'm the only white guy on the team. The others are like, Hawaiians, Samoans, That was my team sport in Hawaii. And I just wasn't cut out for it, really. I was, I think I got most improved player or something like that.
I don't see you as being the most coachable person. If people are going to tell you what to do, I don't think you're going to be really receptive to that.
Yeah.
Trouble-wise, did you get in any trouble in high school, or were you flying under the radar?
I got suspended for a few days. And, I'm a good kid. I was tall, I had acne and long hair or whatever. But
they don't suspend you for that. What'd they suspend you for?
I might have got caught smoking weed at some point. Pretty light-duty stuff. I'm a pretty straight shooter. I went on a motorcycle trip around the U.S., got thrown in the clink in Santa Barbara. That involved a bottle of Ouzo, and that was a year or two into the Mudhoney years. And don't let anyone tell you Santa Barbara jails are a cakewalk.
I wouldn't know. I haven't been to jail in Santa Barbara, or I don't think anywhere else, which is nice for me.
I like to say it was a case of mistaken identity.
And Ouzo. So not too much trouble by any means. You've been able to get through life in that. You've finished high school. You're in Olympia. And what, are you just coming up to Seattle for a ton of shows every weekend and living that life?
Yeah. I mean, we would go to Tacoma to the Community World Theater right around that time. You talk about these places where bands could play and have gigs. One of them was the Mountaineers Club in Seattle, where the Violent Femmes played, Black Flag played.
Huh.
There again is that kind of fringe mountain culture meets punk rock culture that I keep trying to draw a connection to. But these venues, these old school venues, they would pop up and promoters would put bands wherever they could. Jim May ended up getting an old theater down in Tacoma, I think right off the 56th Street exit or something like that. They had all kinds of bands come through, even out-of-town bands that were heading to Vancouver would play there that wouldn't play Seattle. But we used to go up from Olympia or down from Seattle for those shows all the time. And the Crescent Ballroom also in Tacoma. There's a great scene in Tacoma.
From all the pictures and stuff that I've seen of you back in the day, you look like the dude who's sending it, going a little bit harder than everybody else, maybe. Is that how you get noticed? Are you just like that crazy kid at shows that SubPop someone there is like, who is this kid and why do we see him everywhere? Or how do you end up in the music scene in Seattle?
I don't know. Part of it is my brothers were pretty funny, big, tall, obnoxious guys. And I picked up a lot of my sense of humor from those guys. Got a lot of my sense of humor from my mother, Blanche. So I'm tall, kind of high profile, long hair.
You're a giant.
Loud.
You're like 6'4".
I used to go to like basketball and soccer games with my brother and he would heckle.
Uh-huh.
So I started picking up heckling bands, and I kind of enjoyed that. But half the time they were, the bands were friends of mine and I was like a plant in the audience. But the scene was so small, it was like our Crumb comic book. You had the fat guy, the tall, skinny guy, everyone just looked like a character back then. Mm-hmm. And it felt like there was about 30 of us. Maybe 25, maybe 20.
Well, I'm going to ask you how you got integrated into the scene in a minute. First, I'm going to talk about my sponsors. And my first sponsor is Evo. And they are hands down the best retail location in the country for bike, skate, wake, surf, lifestyle, and more. And they have everything you could possibly want for your adventure. I have personally shopped at Evo since they opened because no one comes close to the service they offer and the vibe they create. Their stores in Denver, Seattle, and Portland are some of the best retail experiences you'll find. And if you can't make it to a store, well, Evo.com has all the brands, all the products, and a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy. For listening to the show, they're going to give you 10% off your entire order. If you're in-store, mention the code TPM10 to your cashier. And if you're online, use the code TPM10. That's all one word with capital letters, and you'll get that 10% off. My next sponsor is Rescue Water. And now that it's summer, hydrating is more important than ever. And with Rescue Water, it's all about proactive recovery. You're probably asking yourself, what does proactive recovery even mean? Well, think of it like this. If you really need energy, you skip the coffee and go straight to an energy drink. It's a similar principle with Rescue Water. When you really need to hydrate, like when you get off the trail, out of the skate park, done at the gym, or with your run, skip the traditional sports drink and try a Rescue Water. It's science and it works. And while this is an advertisement, I really do drink Rescue Water at the end of big nights. And for me, hangovers are a thing of the past. If you've been listening to the podcast and haven't tried a Rescue Water yet, do me a favor and buy one next time you're at the store. It will make you a believer, and you can thank me later. If you don't want to go to the store, check out rescuewater.com. That's RESQ water.com. and save 20% on a 12-pack case with the code RESQ Water TPM. That is all one word. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. There are so many things I can say about 10 Barrel, but first and foremost, they have amazing beer. My personal favorite is the Out of Office Pilsner, but a close second is the wildly popular pub beer. While 10 Barrel is all about beer, their roots are in action sports, and they put their money where their heart is. And you can see that in the athletes and events they sponsor, but most importantly, this podcast. Support the beer that supports action sports, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Find out more about the beers and events over at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, so...
Can I take a pee?
Yeah, they're right around the corner. You have now taken a piss. We're back. And yeah, how did you even get involved in the Seattle music scene? Because you're like a dude with no musical talent per se.
I have impeccable taste.
I'm not talking about your taste.
Well, that's it. I'm a music fan. And I like going to those shows that were so intimate with such crazy, good bands. And you feel so safe. You feel such a sense of community. You're having a great time. All of a sudden, your friends are putting together a record label. You're having lunch with them. It's a guy named Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman.
And are they organized putting together a record label? Or is it kind of like, we're just going to throw shit on the wall and see what sticks?
Bruce started Sub Pop. It was a fanzine. He would put out comp tapes. Then it was a column. It was like a news column, a culture column. Then entered Jonathan Poneman, who'd been a promoter of shows in Seattle. He and Jonathan got together and Sub Pop was born, the record label. Those guys were bitching about how they were putting out these 7 inches, like I don't know how many, but they put a couple out. Sub Pop 200 had just come out, things like that, like these first early Sub Pop records.
And they were like the mailing list where you become a part of it, you get the thing sent to you, like an old school way of doing it. That was what everybody...
Maybe even before that, the singles mailing list, but close, you know. I mean, it was real analog. You know, boxes, tape, phone calls. You're calling colleges, trying to get them to play the record. And you're trying to get the hometown record store in Portland or Ann Arbor to pay you for the 5 singles they bought from you. They were bitching about everyone owing them money and about to go out of business. And I was like, I'll come work for you. I'll sit on the phone and call people and tell them to pay. And they looked at each other. And next thing I knew, I was on the phone trying to get money out of record stores that owed them, you know, $30 and calling radio stations, asking them to play the single. One of the first employees, if not the first, at Sub Pop.
And you probably don't have much experience with any work before that in terms of like jobs. You're not calling people asking for invoices to be paid.
No, I was working at the Pink Door in the market, Italian restaurant, as a prep cook or pasta chef or whatever by night, and then working at Sub Pop during the day. And then going to shows, so sleeping about, 3 or 4 hours a night, maybe.
There's drugs separation, I would say, between weed and alcohol and other stuff. Where are you in that mix?
I'm super square. Well, I didn't even do weed. I stopped smoking pot in high school, basically.
You just boozed.
Yeah.
And you're good at it.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how good anyone is at it. It's diminishing returns. It was fun and funny, and I seem to think it made me cuter and smarter and funnier.
I mean, it does when they're drinking with you.
Yeah, there you go. So, yeah.
I mean, it's a big time in Seattle. There's a whole bunch of things changing, and you're part of the music business really when it starts in terms of the label here, because Sub Pop's kind of looked at as the label that changed Seattle, I would say. I mean, I go to the airport now when I see them.
Bruce and John, hats off to those guys. They did an incredible job with Sub Pop, and they really crystallized the scene. They had the vision to fly a journalist over from England, Everett True, and so he wrote a piece. And, really the Seattle scene broke in the UK first. And that's where it was like, all of a sudden it was grunge.
And was it Mudhoney first that broke over there?
Yeah, Mudhoney.
Before we even get into your days with Mudhoney, so you're a desk jockey saying you owe me money, you owe me money, you owe me money. And are you good at that? Is that like...
No, I mean, whatever. I don't even remember how many paychecks I got. I was making like $3.50 an hour or something like that.
But you're a talker. And you probably can be a dick when you need to be. I mean, if you're a band manager, you probably have to be when you're trying to get money. And I would think that translates, you probably first learned that on the phone is like, no, dude, you owe us this money. And you probably do it in a funny kind of way too, but I don't know. I'm just
assuming.
Well,
you're speaking to like-minded people. You're speaking to people that like rock bands, that like your thing or whatever, and you're just trying to get them to play by the numbers a little bit. I mean, you got to get paid in order to keep the label alive and keep the culture flowing. But that's not that fun, Who wants to be an enforcer? So that's why Mudhoney were the flagship band for Sub Pop. And I was good friends with those guys. I was having raging parties at my place in West Seattle called the Pink House down here on Alki Point. It was right behind IGA, which is now Cactus. And so, we would go through kegs before it was getting dark. We'd be on our third keg sometimes. And it was pretty raging. So it was a good mix of like butt rockers, heavy metal dudes, punk rockers, metal kids. It was just really a cool, healthy, weird Seattle mix. It was fun. So the Mudhoney guys would attend those things. I'd be working at Sub Pop. And then it was, Mudhoney's going to go on tour. And I think Mark Arm asked me to go with them, help them out, like basically sell shirts or whatever, help drive, be a roadie, even though I didn't know how to tune a guitar, and I still don't. So basically, hit the road with them, and I went to Jonathan Poneman, I remember specifically, and I said, look, man, these guys are giving me an opportunity to go. They've asked me to go on this tour.
And you're 21. It's like you don't want to sit at a desk.
No, we're taking it to the world. I'm going to go see the world. This is pretty awesome. In a $900 van. I said to Jonathan, I don't want to miss this opportunity to see the world, go to these record stores or radio stations that I've been calling in these towns, college towns or big cities.
And you already had connections.
And so I was like, I'm going to go. And I said, I want my job when I come back. And he said, no. And I said, well, fine, I'm going to go anyways.
That kicks off your career.
Yeah.
Eventually, the band looks at you as like the fifth member of the band. I've seen some documentaries, and the picture they paint of you, at least in the documentaries I've seen, is like, Bob is the good times guy. He is the dude who is going to party harder than anybody else. He's going to make sure that people get paid, and that's all he's going to do. He's not going to set up the instruments. He's not going to do anything else, and it's laughable almost to think that he would, because this is what this guy does, and when I think about it, I would think if I was in the band, I'd want you to do more, but you guys are probably all in one just like party circus, because it seems like Mudhoney was a band that liked to drink beer and have a good time.
Sure. It's a lot of hard work. I mean, I guess you're young, you got green bone, and you're sharp, and you can handle a lot. So sure, you're partying and stuff like that, and that's what a lot of people remember, and that's kind of what sticks out. But you're chasing parts that fell off the van down the highway at 3 a.m. and trying to get the valves fixed in New Mexico. And you're trying to find a place for the band to stay so you don't have to buy another hotel room and save the $150 you made the night before. There's a lot of balls in the air, I guess.
I managed athletes, and it was kind of the same. They don't think about the flights and all the things that you have to do behind. But when you're at the event, I guess that's when you can kind of shine. That's when you can be out of control, Bob, because everything else is taken care of, and you did that a month ago. Yes
and no. So here I am at the T-shirt booth, and I'm trying to find the people that are going to have the cleanest house and quietest house and not want to party afterwards so we can actually sleep, and dealing with the money, and then splitting the driving mostly between me and Matt Lucan. And you're talking about no cell phones whatsoever. You're talking about a roadmap and a piece of paper with your gigs on it, and that's it.
So was there a lot of, we don't know where the fuck we're going, why didn't you get directions?
No, and Matt had already been on tour with the Melvins one time. He'd been around the U.S., I think, and so he was the wise old sage, the guy, he's been on tour.
The sane mind that people look to for direction.
Yeah, that's him. So we thought it was perfectly normal to try and dry your socks on top of the dashboard during your, while you're driving around in the hot sun. Little we know that sucks. And you don't have to do that.
And especially as you get bigger, you don't have to do that. But back in the early days, you do a lot of things just out of necessity. We want to sleep at these houses because we don't want to pay $150 in
Yeah, you get to the club and you use the women's room because it's cleaner and there's probably toilet paper in there and the club's not open and you're waiting for sound check. So, there's a lot of really...
What's a day like for you?
It's all different. I mean, Michelle from Bulging Eye booked those early tours. She booked a lot of bands like Flaming Lips, Tad, Nirvana, Mudhoney. She booked a lot of the Sub Pop bands. And sometimes there were long drives in there in a rickety van. We used to, it was kind of a formula. We would, out of the kitty that we had, which was barely staying, out of the money that we had, it was barely staying level. You couldn't afford a breakdown or hotel rooms or anything. But we would wake up every morning, pay for everyone's breakfast, including the host, whoever had us over to their house. And then you hit the road, you're fumbling with the, at road atlas, trying to find the club, maybe make a call or two, try to estimate your time of arrival.
Average 5 to 7 hours in a van?
It just changes all the time. Right. It changes all the time. And then you roll in and, you load in, the doors open, and then it's time to go to work and find the next place to stay or...
That's your job, is to find the place to stay and do all those things.
All of the above, except for tune guitars and play the songs.
So. Right. So, in everything that I've seen and stuff, it looks like you guys are always having fun and drinking beers.
And we were. I mean, so it comes naturally. I guess I like people and I like talking to people. And it's like the people that are coming to these shows like your band. And so all of a sudden, there's this kinship.
Yep.
You're alternative. You're into music culture. And you're out for an adventure. You could do it with your arms tied behind your back when you're having a good time at it. And it's fun. And I often did do it with my arms tied behind my back. Just kidding. Half kidding.
On the road with bands, I mean, you're the manager. You have to deal with all the problems. Like you said, if something falls off the bus or off the van somewhere, you have to go pick it up. Eventually, the tours get bigger, I think, and it gets a little easier, but you're still managing all the bullshit. It doesn't matter. And on the road, there's a lot of drugs and alcohol, right? And you have to manage all that shit. You have to make sure people are on stage at a certain time. Is that ever a challenge?
The Mudhoney guys were pretty self-managing as far as that.
Played on time and did their thing?
I mean, we didn't miss shows I remember we canceled one because it was just an insane drive and we just were broke and broken and we couldn't do it. And then I worked for REM for 12 years and I missed one show.
Well, yeah, but I look at REM as with Mudhoney, it's Touch Me, I'm Sick, and you're losing your religion with REM. Yeah, it's a totally different world.
Yeah, true. So I can remember when you start getting a bigger budget. All of a sudden, you're making more than $150 a night. I remember Lexington, Kentucky, we got 2 packs of cigarettes and a 6-pack of beer for payment one night. That was pretty awful.
How does that even happen?
You just get ripped off. Yeah. Someone gives you a guarantee. They say, sorry, no one showed up. And you're just like, this sucks.
And you have to deal with, I would think the managers and everybody of the clubs aren't the most, maybe sometimes they're reputable music fans, but you probably have some scumbags too.
Oh, yeah. But then you meet some beautiful people. I mean, I got back from some of those early Mudhoney tours and I used to send postcards to the ones I liked. Yeah. That was just because it was so refreshing and nice to have nice people out there. Someone did you solid. And I don't know. That's just me being social.
And how long does the whole Mudhoney thing last for you?
Mudhoney, that was about 12 years, I think, roughly. And then Mudhoney started making a little bit more money. And I remember we were in New York or somewhere, and we were like, okay, or Texas, I can't remember. We got enough money to buy an extra spare guitar. That is how base we were, The big graduation was getting an extra guitar.
What year is this, you think?
That was 88. That would have been the first tour. And then we started getting a bigger budget. You're hiring sound men. You're hiring light people. You're getting hotels. You're not sharing beds anymore. And then SubPop was struggling and kind of faltering and having trouble paying bands. There was a lot of robbing Peter to pay Paul. So Mudhoney were one of their big mainstays and they were making money. And Nirvana hadn't broken. And so there was money from Mudhoney, I think, going to some of the other bands, that I won't mention. Right at that time, SubPop was really taking it on water and faltering.
They're about to die.
Yeah. And then Nirvana breaks. I said to Mudhoney, managers of bands are really creepy. Let me be your creepy manager and sign you to Warner Brothers, or sign you to a major label, rather. And so then we started shopping. And that was Sony in New York. We went to LA. Met with all these record labels and finally landed at Reprise.
And you did that because you liked those guys the most?
I probably did that because Jonathan Poneman said he wouldn't hire me back after that first Mudhoney tour. No, we had to do that to keep the band alive and keep thriving, keep making their art, and keep the group together.
That was a pivotal moment in the band's history, right? If they would have stayed on a little longer, maybe SubPop could have made them happy financially, where they would have stayed with SubPop and they would have never...
I mean, it was a weird timing thing. I mean, SubPop was going down for the third time and Nirvana broke.
And I mean, that changes the world, right? If you look in the history books of music, that right there, when they break, that's a new part of history.
Yeah.
There was stuff going on
So that's sort of the second wave of Seattle.
But the first wave of Seattle to the masses where they think it changes pop culture.
Correct.
Because the underground knew about Seattle.
The underground was the first wave, and then the second wave was, bam, all of a sudden, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, everyone's on the top 5, whatever.
Is that weird for you? And for those guys, are they just like, what the fuck, man? How are we not here?
No, not at all. I mean, Here Comes Sickness, the lyrics and the songs are pretty basic. I think the bands like Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Soundgarden all aspired to be really produced, really well produced, and aspired to be big rock bands. Mudhoney, by contrast, were happy being a cult sensation, I think.
Well, you can look at it goes back to Green River. Green River breaks up because a couple guys, Amen interviewed, he sat in that chair right there and said, hey, at that point in my career, I had never had money. I was starving, and we were too worried. I don't want to put words in his mouth either, but he kind of alluded to, like, I just needed to make something so I could pay my rent. This had to be successful. I'm about to go back to school because I don't believe in music with what we're doing now. And then Mark Arman, his faction is kind of like, it's all about the music, man. We're not going to worry about everything else. Yeah. And if you look at it now, Amen's financially sound, and the dudes in Mudhoney still work.
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's what each side aspired to be. And now there's a mutual respect, I would think, between everybody.
Yeah. I mean, it's apples and oranges, too, I mean, honestly, like...
And I know nothing. I'm just talking to create conversation.
These guys were working hard. I remember being out with Mudhoney, and like we were just going, holy crap, Pearl Jam got on the road for 6 months at a time? Like, what the hell is that? Who does that? That was an ambition that wasn't really in our camp. We like to come home and be connected to the community or whatever and go back out. But those guys were like, they had a vision of taking it to the people. They also could write frickin' pop songs. Not that Touch Me, I'm Sick or, Sweet Young Thing Ain't Sweet No More aren't pop songs.
Pearl Jam could write hits.
Yeah.
And while those were underground hits, Pearl Jam could write commercial hits. Yeah. Where I was in Radford, Virginia in college, and 1993, I mean, Pearl Jam's everywhere. I mean, Nirvana as well, and then it's really close for the whole scene not dying, but taking a turn that you saw. I mean, there's a death, and then that changes the perception of Seattle all around. And when do you get out of it in Seattle? Because you go to REM.
The Mudhoney thing? So Mudhoney, they were a little bit starting to disperse a little bit. They were doing side projects. Steve Turner, I remember at one point, said he wanted to go back to school. That upset the bass player Matt Lucan, who I was good friends with and close with and still am. He lives a couple blocks from me in West Seattle. We do welfare checks on each other. Anyhow, Steve said he was going to go back to school, and Matt was like, well, why are we a band? Why are we rehearsing? Why are we writing songs if we're not going to go on tour? That was the other thing, is Steve didn't want to tour. Matt wanted to go be a band and be on the road and write records and then take them to people. And so there was this weird moment where Steve was like, I'm going to go back to school, and kind of shut everything down, sort of made this personal decision,
That affects other people.
Yes. And so Matt was like, well, how can you just do that? How can you just make that decision? And he stood up and walked out and quit the band. And that was it. I was out. I was done managing.
Are you friends with Steve today?
Not necessarily.
When was the last time you talked to him?
Saw him in the Goodwill about 10 years ago or something. No, actually, I saw him at a Pearl Jam show in Spokane or something. I mean, that happens. People grow together. People grow apart. I mean, it happens
more in bands than the rest of the world.
That's perfectly all right for him to go, I want to do that. The weird thing was that, then he didn't really go to school, and the band starts doing more records and going on tour. I'm not exactly sure. Maybe Mudhoney wasn't going at a pace that Lucan, liked. Obviously was the case. Wasn't going at a pace. And maybe that was a head fake and a kind of a cold kill by Steve, but whatever, for whatever reason, it's fine. And they replaced Matt, so they're thriving and still having a good time at their pace. They work and they go on the road, and then they come back, record a record, and work.
Yeah, I hear about them every once in a while, and whenever I hear the name Mudhoney, if I'm not in town, I tell whoever's in town, you've got to see this band. They're awesome live, and they are the history of Seattle music. They were Seattle before it was Seattle. So a band that's you should always see.
Oh yeah, no, they're incredible, and they're such rich history, and I definitely prefer the older records and stuff like that, and I remember that time, but and I haven't seen them more than once or twice since Matt left the band. That was it. It seems to me right around that period I was trying to help manage or help some of the side projects, and it was just diminishing returns. zero money and a lot of effort. And, one of the members pees in my basement. And I was like, this kind of sucks eggs. I need to figure out what I'm going to do.
I'm sure you've peed in other people's basements.
That was Cole Peterson.
You ever peed in someone's basement?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right, so it's the end of the world as you know it, and then you somehow end up at REM.
So, yeah. And so I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs, kind of going, well, what am I going to do? So there was a period when Mudhoney would go on tour, I'd come back and do carpentry. I was doing carpentry, TI work, tenant improvement downtown.
So you're still like a paycheck-to-paycheck dude at this point in your life?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, that was during Mudhoney. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll go back to carpentry. And then a job opened up with REM. They were going on the road in 99, I think. REM were coming to Seattle. They were recording at Bad Animal Studio. Peter Buck had become friends with Stephanie Dorgan, who runs the Crocodile. So I met the band through her, and then a job position opened up. Basically being a band assistant or assistant to the tour manager.
And it's amazing. I mean, not amazing that they would hire you because I don't know you, but the pictures I've seen from you back then, there's a Gary Busey kind of like look to it. I mean, I can see why everybody wants you around based on the pictures because you look like you're a whole lot of fun. It looks like you don't give a fuck at any time. And like, every picture, you always send a picture with your emails. And it's always something wild from like the 90s, early 2000s. Yeah. And it looks like you're out of control, whether you were or not. I'm sure you're handling your business as, I don't think REM would hire you.
Everything was wired relatively tight. And I think one time I screwed up and didn't get the equipment on a flight for Mudhoney when they were going to France. And so we had to pay some extra money.
But then you have to figure it out.
That was like the one time. Another time we missed a flight because of fog in San Francisco. I mean, literally, balls just never hit the ground. And while I may have looked like Gary Busey, I was taking care of business.
I'm not judging. You were the manager of many major bands.
I think I look more like Gary Busey now than I did then. Gary Busey was kind of hot then.
I would say that just more not Gary Busey's face or body, but the look in his eye and the look in your eye.
I call it that sort of you're a field sergeant a little bit. So you're charming people, but then you're also ready to drop the hammer, I guess. So this job opened up with REM, and they said you should consider it. Or Stephanie, my friend Stephanie said you should consider it. And I was like, God, REM, I'm not that big of a fan. I'm a punk rocker. I'm more like edgy music. And it's really not my thing. And I knew that the Nirvana guys loved REM and were huge fans of that pop music and stuff like that. But I was always like into The Accused.
You're not shiny, happy people.
No, I was more of a metalhead and more of a speedcore and punk rock. And
it doesn't make sense when you look at you on paper.
Right.
You went from Mudhoney to REM.
No, and so then I woke up the next day and I was like, what the fuck what are you thinking about, Whittaker? You should totally do this. Big deal, you go home on an airplane if you don't click with these guys.
Yeah.
Don't be a chicken shit. Just put yourself out there, get outside your comfort zone, go check it out. So I went, I met them. They totally charmed me. All of them were so different from each other. And then they get on stage and this chemistry happens. And I was so impressed. All of a sudden, overnight, I was a fan of the individuals and the music. So,
and you sold your Converse and bought some creepers, and the rest is history.
No, unfortunately, I stayed Bob Whittaker. That was a 12-year run. I was assistant to the band and helped the tour manager on that first, I want to say it was 99. I can't remember. The Up record or something. Anyhow, my first gig tour managing them officially was 2001 with South America. So I remember people being like, God, you're kind of young to be a tour manager. I'm like, ha, ha, ha. And that was a whole learning curve for me, too. That was really exciting and fun.
You go from the underground to a mega band.
Well, you go from a band singing about Mud Ride to a band that's really political and to a band that has a huge consciousness and are edgier than their audience, which was a great combination for me.
I guess they were way ahead of their time. Like, if they came out now, it'd be kind of normal. But back then, it was
way out front. I gotta say, they also have a great manager, and I really like that guy. So I've met a lot of booking agents, managers, rock bands, whatever, and I do not like that many managers. I was a manager, but REM's manager, Bertus Downs, was incredible. He was
good people in a world of not good people?
Really incredible, yeah. So that work environment was really healthy.
And when you work for a band like REM, you can't work for anybody bigger and still have credibility for the product that's coming out, I feel like, because they're able to be mega rock stars at that point and still be cool to like the mod, whatever kind of group at that point.
Yeah, I mean, Peter Bucks was reading feminist baseball fanzines. Like, He started working in a record store, and he's still that guy. He buys fanzines and records every day. It's like...
How are you doing at that point, though? So you go from Mudhoney, paycheck to paycheck, and I think about, I'm going to be a carpenter again because I've toured the world, I've seen everything, but I haven't made shit.
I literally wanted to go up to the San Juan Islands, live in a tent, and get a job, like, building places.
But now I would think after REM, you could go to the San Juan Islands and buy a house and just chill, because you're dealing with a different animal where I would think your income changes tremendously going from Mudhoney and it's all about the music to REM, and it's like, it doesn't matter what it's all about. There's a lot of things, but we are huge. And do you get paid being with REM? Are you making like 6 figures being a band manager?
I don't. Yeah, so I was getting paid weekly. I was doing pretty good, and so...
What do you make a week? If you don't mind me asking, and if you do, don't say it. Seriously, no one at REM is going to be mad because Bobby Whittaker said what he made a week as assistant band manager.
Yes, I don't feel like I want to talk about how much I made. Those guys took care of me and they grossed me up to pay my own taxes. I was an independent contractor.
Did it set you up later on in life at all?
And so I had never had health insurance, and all of a sudden, you've got a budget where you can hire people to take care of problems or make sure problems don't happen.
Those dudes each own like 15 houses apiece if they want.
No. They did break the record at the time for the record deal they struck with Warner Brothers.
They made a lot of money.
I can't remember what it was, and that's before you could download music. So they are the tail end of big record deals.
They're super talented and earned every penny they made, and they paid people to help them on the road. Did it allow you to buy a house? I mean...
Yeah. Well, I bought my house with Mudhoney money.
So you're doing okay with Mudhoney?
I bought my house in West Seattle for $135,000 or something.
Wow, and it's probably worth 10 times that now.
I didn't remember what I put down on it, but we didn't have a lot of overhead, and we signed to Warner Brothers.
And it's the cheapest band ever, right? Like,
yeah.
You're like, hey, we're not going to spend a cent of our advance on anything but like one recording in a basement.
Then you switch to working with REM, and you're out on the road. I don't know. I always akin it to like fishing in Alaska. You go out and you sleep, 2 hours a night or whatever. You're the first one awake, the last one asleep. And you make a lot of money, and you come back and you're a mess. I mean, literally, I come back and I am going 1,000 miles an hour. You sit here between tours, spend all your money, and then you go back out.
Yeah.
I was not on retainer. So you're getting paid a lot, and then you're not getting paid anything. So I started picking up bands in between there. I did the Yeah Yeah Yeahs a little bit.
They were actually pretty big.
They're really sweet. Yeah. Really great band. But the fishing in Alaska or crab fishing in Alaska is something that people from the Northwest can relate to, because people in Seattle always had a lot of friends.
Yeah.
You either worked at Boeing or you went up on a crab boat, which was not safe.
Right.
And you come back with a lot of money, but you're a little bit cooked. You're like at this 1,000-year stare. And it takes you months to get back to normal, reconnect to your community. And by then you're broke and you got to go back to Alaska and get on the crab boat. So that for me was what that cycle of touring became. You're worried about so much. 1,000 things go right in one afternoon. One thing goes wrong, and it's your fucking name that gets yelled, And that for 12 years.
So now I'm not going to fast forward, but I am going to fast forward because we got a little bit of time left, a couple minutes.
Fuck. Good.
Yeah, are you done?
I need some Rolaids. I got them in my car, and I keep thinking about them.
Dude, you're going to sound great, but I know this is not something that you wanted to do by any means, but you kind of did. You agreed to it, but then you were stressing out about it for some reason.
Just like going out on the road with REM, I got to put myself out there. Just like making a stupid freaking movie, I got to put myself out there and keep growing and challenging.
And you were the star of your movie. That's the funny thing, is like you look at everybody in that movie, and you were the star. There's a lot of questions I wanted to ask about it that I wasn't, but like training-wise, you don't look like a mountain climber.
No.
At all.
No. I've been stress eating for 3 years trying to make the movie too, but I trained, sort of. I mean, when I was 16, I trained for Rainier by skateboarding.
And when you were 45, you trained by probably skateboarding as well.
Right. No, I put a backpack on a couple times. Okay, what are we fast forwarding to?
We are fast forwarding to Inappropriate Questions. So it's a part of the show where I have someone usually that ask 3 inappropriate questions to you. But I had Matt Vaughn, and he was going to ask questions, but then he backed out.
He's a smart man.
He said, you never know how you're going to get Bob, and I don't want to piss Bob off.
That's a compliment. I'm not smart, but I'm quick.
I'm quick too. That's the same thing, man.
So who did you get your inappropriate question?
So it's a guy, he's a podcaster, and he has one of the greatest podcasts in the world. A lot of people know him as the guy sitting right across from you. That's me, Mike Powell. And I came up with 3 inappropriate questions. Yeah. But before I get into them, the conservation part, do you want to say something about...
A little bit. I do got to pee.
Let's go do it.
Yeah.
We're back. So conservation is something that you're all about now. Probably not what you were about when you were younger. You might have thought about it here and there, but you're busy partying and traveling the world. But as you get older and not burdened with a band to manage on the road, what are you doing conservation-wise? And please keep this short, because while I recycle, conversation is only a little bit for me.
Yeah, so you got these big chunks of time off. You come back from the road, and so I was always getting back to nature. I mean, I started out there, and I really enjoy it. And so when you're a kid, you're at a ski area, you're on a trail, you're at a beach, you don't think nothing of it. Well, that shit's all public land. Someone takes care of that. That has designations. Ski areas don't just grow there. It takes a lot of effort. And so I started getting excited about giving back to community. And for me, that's punk rock. So while I was touring with REM, making more money, I bought some property out in Northeast Washington in the middle of nowhere and started working on a trail. So basically created a 30-mile trail that connects 4 towns, 2 school complexes. And all of a sudden, the public has 15 miles of waterfront, of lake and river waterfront that they haven't had because it was private land. So for me, being a part of something, you're in a band, you're on tour with the band, you're working with one specific band. For me, this was an extension of that. So I was kind of working together with people on this project and seeing it to fruition was pretty fun and pretty cool. So it's not necessarily conservation. I'm not like, save the whales. I am. But now it's like, wow, these amazing trails that I used to run around on and take for granted took an effort. And so now I'm part of that effort. That's all.
So it just ties the whole Whittaker experience back together. I don't know if that even makes sense, but I'm just saying it.
I mean, yeah, it's not that big of a stretch, really. I mean, it's like, I like being a part of something. I didn't go on the road with REM or Mudhoney to make money. I like being a part of things.
I can have a whole conversation about that, because money I find very interesting, but I'm not going to.
I can't stand it.
It makes a lot of things easier. It's not like it's good or bad. But we're going to go into inappropriate questions. We said Matt Vaughn was too afraid to ask you questions, so I will.
He's always been a little bit afraid of me, I think.
I can see that, though. And if anybody hasn't been to Easy Street Records, to me, it is a destination in Seattle. So you fly into the city. If you're going to have breakfast anywhere, I don't know if there's others, but there's one record store that I know of in this city. It's called Easy Street Records in West Seattle. They serve breakfast, and it should be something to check off your list. After you get done at the SubPop store at the airport, go to Easy Street Records over in West Seattle, have your breakfast, and check out something that should be remembered as West Seattle history already.
It's a cultural mecca.
So we will go to inappropriate questions. My first question is, would Mudhoney be more successful if you were more of a 9-to-5 office type guy making phone calls and doing stuff?
So we kind of did that as their career grew. I stayed home and hired a tour manager, and I wasn't on the road with them.
Okay.
So I don't think so, because that's ultimately what the formula became. Like when you talk about making more and more money and your budget gets higher, I was hiring roadies, tour managers, and I was staying home and not going on every tour. Staying home to work the record and or the record label. Flying down to LA. And so I was doing that role. And they're still not huge.
No, but they're still not huge, but culturally, they will never be taken out of the history books because they are the history books. Whether they made a lot of money or not doesn't matter.
Steve Turner calls them a footnote in rock and roll, which is kind of a cute reference.
Commercially, they were footnote, but in society, they're huge.
No, they were prime movers.
They were inspirations and visionaries, and they created a lot of stuff for other people, but they never, these guys still have to work regular jobs.
It's funny to think a couple good jokers in a van can be prime movers or some sort of cultural lightning rod or
It's easy to look back 30 years and say that, that's what I do. I'm going to go with question number 2.
Bring it.
In the days of excess, what was the whole women's situation like? Did you wake up with 5 naked women in your bed at some point?
No. I always sort of wished that had happened because I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic high school. I was pretty shy. Matt Lukin said, I think Matt Lukin didn't have sex till he was 24. He said he thought he was gay.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
So sad.
No, I'm serious. Mudhoney were some of the squarest. There was no locker room talk.
It's just the feeling. You don't need to talk at all. I would think being in a band, you just want to bring a girl home with you at the end of the night, or just...
What was the inappropriate question again?
Yeah, excess. Did you bang a lot of chicks on your days on the road?
No. I do remember, like, in the early days, you'd try to stay at girls' houses, like, or apartments because they were cleaner. But I'm telling you that Mudhoney are one of the dorkiest, squarest bands ever. We went on tour with Sonic Youth. You know, Sonic Youth would pull into a town and go to a bookstore. But at the same time, Thurston Moore put out a tour diary saying he's banging Kim on top of the van while she's flipping people the bird. It was a joke. But in all seriousness, it was like...
What's the craziest groupie thing you've seen in your career? Because you've seen a lot of shit. You don't have to say names, but what's the craziest shit that's happened? Because once I had a girl drive by my car and pull her top down. That was pretty cool. You probably had a lot more than that.
So Mudhoney were reacting to Skid Row, Whitesnake, Motley Crue, a lot of this LA crap. So Mudhoney were, when you talk about those guys splitting in Green River, Mudhoney were reacting to that cliche. And so in the same spirit, there was very little to zero, as you say, groupie or... And I'm proud of that, actually. It's like, to this day, I don't think that stuff is funny or... I mean, look at the Beastie Boys. Look how much regret the Beastie Boys had from their early career to the end of... When they came into consciousness and realized how bad they were, we were never that bad. I mean, it's a fair point, fair question.
But I think objectifying women is one thing, but being on the road and going home with a girl who wants to go home with you because you're her favorite singer, that's not about objectifying her. That's just like giving into her dream and having a good night and whatever.
It didn't happen a lot. Huh. I mean, you know.
Yeah, well, that's a bummer. Yeah. I wish it happened a lot for everyone, including the manager, but I guess it did not. Now I will go to question number 3. So at that time, there were a ton of Seattle bands. Everybody seemed like they could get signed because of a sound. And if you had to pick out one band, and if you're uncomfortable with it, then you don't have to pick them out. No, not that you hate. that was signed based off of no talent. You might hate them or like them or whatever. That were signed and you looked at their music ability and like, but these guys can't even play a show.
I guess I'll take this to another place. There was bands that were like, that were not Seattle. East Side bands. Mark and Steve were from the East Side, but they were Mudhoney. But, you know, Matt Lucan's from Aberdeen. Dan Peters from Spanaway. So when I think about bands that were associated with and part of that whatever thing, I think of like, what was Lane Staley's band? What was that?
Alice in Chains?
Yeah, Alice in Chains. I always think of them as not being a Seattle band, not part of the scene. Or like Candlebox or something. Were they from Seattle?
I think they were from Seattle as well.
Stuff like that. If I could throw shade, I would just be like, you know, what is that? Like, how is it that is lumped in with Seattle sound?
You know, it's crazy that it is, but at the same time, those guys probably had 4 or 5 hits. They were on the radio and kids in Virginia and other places heard them.
The other Seattle band that got signed that I think shouldn't have would probably be Silverchair from Australia.
Oh, yeah.
You know, stuff like that. I mean, I got into a little bit of a funny moment with Kurt Cobain and Waylon from the Stone Temple Pilots. Like, I took Kurt into Waylon's dressing room one time. Kurt was on my shoulders. The security guard came up and was going to kick me and Kurt out. I let Kurt slide down off my shoulders. He stood there. Waylon comes over and... Isn't that his name? Waylon? Is that it?
The lead singer? Wyland,
whatever. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. How embarrassing. Comes over and he goes, listen, he goes, no, leave these guys alone. They're cool, because he recognized it was Kurt. And so Kurt goes, I hear people tell me you sound like us. And he goes, yeah. He goes, yeah, I probably owe you some publishing. And Wyland pulls a $1 bill out of his pocket and gives it to Kurt. And it was just kind of an awkward moment. So that's another Seattle band that wasn't a Seattle band that shouldn't have been signed, maybe.
That was one that, even on the East Coast, we knew that they weren't a Seattle band.
I'm just trying to be funny by picking 2 bands that are totally far, regionally, not Seattle, but we're Seattle, part of the Seattle.
They had the sound, but I mean, we could pick it out as like, they were the next wave of like, I wouldn't say copycats, but I would say copycats because I'm nobody. I can say whatever the fuck I want.
They're heavily influenced. I remember the first time I was standing in White Center, putting gas in my car, and a dude, a rat farmer, we called him, went by like in a Camaro or something, and Nirvana had just come out, and it had just hit the radio, and all of a sudden it was blowing. This is like literally 2 days into that, never mind being released. And this butt rocker drives up to the light while I'm pumping gas in my car. And I was like, he's cranking Nirvana. And I was like, holy shit.
You're in Seattle and that's happening and you've heard it for a while. But to us, when Nirvana came out, immediately they took over. And at my little Radford University, it was like Seattle's sound took over. It was crazy how fast that happened and how quick other stuff kind of died. You're getting another visual
sorry
text.
about that.
So you can go to help your emergency for the death. I'm going to thank you very much for being on the podcast. And it wasn't that bad, right?
No, I get a kick out of it. I can spin a good yarn and I can yuck it up at a social event, but interviews are strange for me. I've watched people do them my whole life, so I'm new to this game.
We did it. It's over. Thank you.
Well, keep up the good work.
So that was time with Bob Whittaker, and what a life that guy has lived. He grew up the son of an American hero, and I'm sure there was a ton of perks to that we didn't talk about. And then he was actively involved in one of the biggest movements of my generation. And now he comes full circle with this whole conservation aspect of his life and climbing as well with Return to Mount Kennedy. So a pretty cool dude, a ton of stories. And man, I wish there was a GoPro on that guy at all times back in the day. It would be an amazing movie to watch. And while Bob didn't have a GoPro back then, my next guest, Luke Aikens, seems to always have a GoPro on him. He's the only man in the world that I know to jump out of an airplane without a parachute, do it on purpose, and live to tell the story. Luke Aikens is a member of the Red Bull Air Force, and he's an absolute badass when it comes to flying. We're going to talk about his story and the exciting things that he has coming up, and that's on the show next week. Until then, please give me a 5-star rating on whatever platform you listen to me on. If you're on an iPhone, it takes a minute, and here's what you need to do. Go to podcasts on your iPhone or iTunes, search the Powell Movement, and scroll down to where you see the stars. Hit 5 stars and you're done. I thank you so much for doing it, and thank you for listening. And finally, I really need to thank my sponsors for making this show possible. They are Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.